Sports Podcast.
And McAllister down the left field line. Connor Tate is going to round third. He will score. And rounding third is Blaylock. He will score. And the Dogs walk it off.
If you're looking for the latest Georgia Bulldog news in football, basketball, baseball, and recruiting, then you are in the right place.
It's third down. Bryce Young's career. You need 10. Play clock at 4. From the pocket. Launching downfield. Underthrown and intercepted. Keely Ringo has an escort down the sidelines. All the way to the end zone. And Georgia is going to conquer the Crimson Tide.
Hosted by Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams.
Georgia on the mountaintop. Demons be gone, and the drought is over. National champions at long last.
Just sit back, relax, and prepare yourself for these hot takes you're about to listen to.
All right, welcome back to another episode of Classic City Sports. As always, Jeremiah Stoddard and Jonathan Williams. As you can see in the title, we got a special episode for you as Georgia kicks off next Saturday. We've already had a couple games kick off this past weekend with one SEC team being Vanderbilt playing Hawaii last night. So football is officially back. Even though we didn't do this quite before the first SEC team played, we're going to make our SEC predictions today and going down the schedule breakdowns and kind of where we think everybody's going to fall. And then kind of dive into some other stuff, SEC football related today. Jonathan, how are we feeling?
I'm fantastic, Stoddard. It is officially here. Wait is over. You know, you got what? 5 more days, basically. That's all you got to do. Really, you don't even got that many because Thursday, Florida kicks off against Utah. And as Georgia fans, you're going to appreciate watching that game, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah.
Because I don't think that one's going to be a pretty one for Florida as they travel out to Utah to face the Utes and Cam Rising. But, man, it was so great. I don't care what anybody says about the week 0 slate and how the games are trash or whatever. I don't care. Football is back. Getting to watch anything. I stayed up for the entire Hawaii versus Vanderbilt game. Probably the only time I will ever watch a full Vanderbilt football game. But it was just great getting to sit at home, watch some college football, and just appreciate this sport that we love so much.
Yeah, it's great to be back into it. And I will say I was up doing other stuff and everything like that, but I didn't quite watch the whole game last night. And it was crazy the way that game ended based on what you were telling me on it. So Vanderbilt not looking near as dominant as they did to start the season last year against Hawaii when they put up a 60-burger on them over in Hawaii themselves. So this year they're playing at Vanderbilt and ended up being a one-score game right there at the end. And Vanderbilt comes through with a pick to kind of seal that game right in the last minute and a half, 2 minutes of that game. So not looking as strong to start the season as Vanderbilt did last year. So we'll see how they play out this regular season.
Yeah, I was saying the entire football game, I was watching it with my dad, and I was like, Vanderbilt better pray that they pull this one out because, Vanderbilt doesn't have many guaranteed wins on their schedule. And so when you get a game like against Hawaii to open up the year, you better go ahead and win that football game because of the rest of the schedule. I mean, it's outside of Alabama, A&M, maybe UNLV, like that's it. The rest of it, it's going to be a tough stretch for the Commodores.
It's funny that you say that, and so we can go ahead and just kind of give a sneak peek on this part before we jump into the whole schedule. Based on watching that game last night, right? Like I watched, so I did watch some of it, didn't finish it, but seeing how the final score was compared to what it was last year, I don't have a lot of confidence in Vanderbilt to kind of keep going the right direction. I know Clark Lee's doing a good job over there with them overall, and they were looking like a better football team last year. So I was hoping they would build on that, but seeing how they performed against Hawaii, it kind of threw me off on them. And I think the games that you just said are the 2 other ones that I have them winning. I have them going. I'll give a sneak peek into it. 3-9, and the 3 wins being Hawaii because we know that one already. Alabama, A&M. And then they're going to lose to Wake Forest, which is their other out-of-conference game, and then win UNLV. That's the ones that I have them. Out-of-conference-wise, they're not winning against Wake Forest this year, so they're not going to clean sweep the out-of-conference games. I think they're in some trouble when it gets to SEC games. I really don't think they're going to be able to beat anybody based on how they played in week 0.
Yeah, I think they have a good combo in A.J. Swan and Will Shepherd. I don't think A.J. Swan is like a top-tier SEC quarterback by any means, but for Vanderbilt standards, I think A.J. Swan is a pretty good quarterback, and I think he does a pretty fine job running that offense for them. And then Will Shepherd is their best playmaker on offense, and he had some big time plays last night against Hawaii. But I just, when you stack them up against the rest of the SEC teams and you stack them up against the SEC East specifically, it's tough to put any more W's in the column for them when you really analyze those games. I think maybe they could sneak one against Florida. That's about the only game where I could sit here and say maybe so. But like you said,
It's
after
in
watching
Gainesville, though. That's the other. I
Yeah.
looked at that game too, and that one's in Gainesville.
in
And so I think
Gainesville,
there's
and
no
yeah.
way. There's
Plus,
no way.
like you said, after watching them last night, I don't have very much confidence in them being able to go on the road in the SEC and pulling out a dub against even Florida.
Let's read this schedule off real quick. We'll go through the line. Like I just said, Hawaii, Alabama, A&M, Wake Forest, UNLV. Then it starts getting real tough, right? Then you get Kentucky, Missouri, Florida, Georgia, bye week, and then Ole Miss, Auburn, South Carolina, Tennessee. So your out of conference games are Ole Miss, or your crossover games are Ole Miss and Auburn.
Mm.
And then the SEC East teams alone, I don't think they can beat. Like it's a brutal schedule for them this year, honestly.
Yeah, for sure. No doubt. But, Vanderbilt being a bottom feeder of the SEC, that's not what the people want to hear about. They don't want to hear about how are the doors going to be this year because everybody knows Vanderbilt's going to finish towards the bottom of the SEC East. So I think the best thing for us to do for this episode, in years past, we've kind of gone down each team's schedule game by game and told you what we're going to do. But I think the best thing to do now, so we don't kind of just drag this out for you guys and you hear us ramble on about, well, this is how we think Mississippi State's going to do. I think it's just like, we'll give you like our top hitters, like our top 5 hitters of the SEC. We'll tell you who we think is going to win each of division, kind of tell you maybe a team that we have a little higher than maybe others don't. I think Stoddard has some really good surprises in the mix for his one that even when I pulled his up, I was like, wow, that's a pretty big shock. I'm interested to hear your take on that one. So let's start with the big hitters. Obviously, we'll go ahead and start with Georgia. We are a Georgia home podcast. That is what the listeners want to hear for the most part. So we'll go ahead and start off with the Dogs. So let's hear your take on the Dogs this season.
All right, so the Georgia is obviously going to roll through this regular season. I think most people are saying that overall, right? The biggest games that you have on your schedule is South Carolina at home early, week 3, which is your first SEC game. You get Tennessee on the road late in the year, and you get Ole Miss at home again late in that season as well. So those 3 games are the one that everybody's going to be looking at, and I think the biggest thing that I just said there is South Carolina. While I think South Carolina is going to be a decent team this year, it's at home in Sanford Stadium. So I give Georgia a pretty big edge on that one. Ole Miss also in Athens, where Georgia is going to be able to run up the score a little bit on that side. And I don't expect Ole Miss to play a lot of defense like they haven't really done over the years. The biggest question mark is how's that game going to play out in Knoxville when they travel up to play against Tennessee later in the season. I do think Georgia's going to win it. I do think it's going to be a decent game, kind of like, last year Georgia won by a couple scores, but it was a pretty competitive game. A lot of excitement kind of thing going on. I think it's going to have that type of scenario again this year. And I think it's going to be one of those games that's coming down to who's going to win the East this year. It's going to, Georgia's going to have to go up there and take that. They're not going to be able to just walk through and have it handed to them kind of thing. But I do have Georgia going 12-0 throughout the regular season.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I'm in the same boat as you, probably to no surprise. People are circling the Ole Miss game, and they are circling the Tennessee game, rightfully so. I think Ole Miss is an interesting matchup, and I might even say that that's a more interesting matchup than Tennessee is, just because Jackson Dart, Quinshon Judkins, you got Lane Kiffin. It is in Athens, so that's always a good heart feeling for you to know as a Dog fan that they have to come to us. We're not going out to the Grove. We're not going out to Ole Miss, and we're not going to experience anything like we did in 2016 when Jacob Eason and then went out there and just got boat raced. I think the biggest thing to stopping Ole Miss is, can you stop the run? Because that's the heart of that offense. That is what they live and die by, rightfully so, when you have a guy like Quinshon Judkins. So, but for Tennessee, I'm not saying that Georgia fans shouldn't be anticipating this game, and I'm not saying that they shouldn't be well prepared for this game, but I think the past 2 years, when you look at what Kirby Smart and that defense has done to that offense, and you look at what Tennessee has this year, and you look at that, they lost Hendon Hooker, and they lost Darnell Wright, and they lost Cedric Tillman, and they lost Jalen Hyatt. That's a lot to lose offensively. And I know that offense is still going to be great. It's still going to put up numbers, but that defense is also going to be the same. I don't think that defense is going to take that much of a step improvement and all of a sudden be a top 30 defense in college football. And Brew McCoy, Squirrel White, those are 2 good wideouts that Tennessee is going to have. I think Joe Milton is going to put up good numbers this year. I mean, that is what that offense is going to do for you as a quarterback. But I think Georgia has figured Tennessee out defensively. You get up in their face, you man up on them. As South Carolina's defensive back said last year, you drop your nuts and you play football against them. That's what you do. You get up in their face, you make them feel you, and you don't let them dictate how this game plays out. And I think that's exactly what Georgia's going to do. So the fact that Kirby Smart and Georgia has basically shut down that offense now for 2 years in a row, I just don't see Tennessee pulling off an upset or a dub against Georgia, even in Knoxville this year.
Yeah, and speaking of Tennessee, I have them coming in second in the East this year, right behind Georgia. I do have them losing 2 SEC games, obviously one being Georgia. The other one I have them dropping is going to be against Alabama, because I think that Alabama's got a little bit of a grudge on that one. They lost their huge winning streak that they had over the Volunteers over like 15, 16 seasons, something stupid. They finally dropped that game. They were on the road. Field was rushed. All the field goal posts pulled out, thrown in the river, all that good stuff. Well, now you got to go back to Tuscaloosa this year, and they're not going to be very happy to see you. I think that's going to be the second loss for them on the season. And yeah, I think, like you were saying, I think Tennessee is kind of figured out how to, even if they've lost a few great receivers, they've still got a lot like you just named right there. And they're going to be able to score points. That's just kind of the offense that they run at this point. They're going to be able to produce points. I think their problem is they don't really have the ability to stop other people that have great offenses, which is why we saw South Carolina go off on them. We saw Alabama score 45 or 48 or whatever the final score was at that one. And Georgia didn't quite score as much, but that was a rainy game. And so it was kind of a lower scoring game on both sides of the ball. I just don't really think that they're going to be able to hang with a team that they actually need to make some defensive stops.
Yeah, I mean, in the SEC, you've got to get some defensive stops, and you got to get some big defensive stops when you're going against when you're going into big time games against the Alabamas and the Georgias of the world. And that's what they're going to have to go through this year. They're going to have to go through Alabama. They're going to have to go through Georgia. And I think Georgia's offense is going to keep clicking. I think Carson Beck is well prepared to play starting quarterback for Georgia this season, like we mentioned many times on this show. And I think that defense is just the Achilles heel of that team ultimately, and it's tough to overcome that. When you can't rely on your defense, and especially when you compile that with your offense is going at a higher pace, and they're putting points on the board quick, but that also means your defense is right back out on the field. And a team like Georgia, they're not necessarily look to score in 1 minute. They're going to milk these drives. And especially with this new rule in college football, which we got to see this last weekend, the clock keeps moving after first downs. So a team like Georgia, heck, they can just really eat up a lot of clock on you, and they can really limit your possessions if they want to. So yeah, I'm right there with you. I have Georgia finishing first, Tennessee second. Let's go over to the West, though. I think this is a very similar situation as the East. People are picking between two teams. You're either picking between LSU or you're picking Alabama to come out on top of the West. Really interesting conversation. I think it's a lot closer than Georgia, Tennessee is. And you and I both already, you and I have different opinions on how the West is going to finish out this year. So I'll give you the floor first and let you speak your piece on this one.
Yeah, and it's going to kind of go back to what I just said about Tennessee playing Alabama. Same kind of concept as we get into this one. I have Bama coming in right on the top there, and I have them actually going 10-2, where I think they might lose to Texas at the beginning of the season, and so that's an out of conference loss. I have them going 7-1 in the SEC, with their one loss being to Ole Miss. It's a team they've done pretty well against overall, but I actually like Ole Miss this season. I think they're going to be able to play pretty well. So that's actually the one loss. The reason I bring that up right here is because I have them beating LSU. The reason is exactly what I just said about Tennessee a minute ago. LSU now has to travel to Tuscaloosa, and once again, Bama has a little bit of a vendetta against them this year, so I don't think they're going to be able to walk out of Tuscaloosa with a win. And with that, I actually have LSU only having that one loss this year, so that's just a tiebreaker kind of thing. So even though I have Bama losing 2 games, I still have them coming ahead just because of the tiebreaker against LSU.
Interesting. I thought it was really interesting.
That's a hot take.
When you said Alabama's going 10-2, but they're winning the West because they're beating LSU. They're going to hold the tiebreaker. I like it. We're getting a little spicy out here. Rudes is asking, when do I get the floor? Rudes, I'm going to be honest with you real quick. If we gave you a camera and people got to see your face on this network, we would lose all our viewers. Everybody would be asking, when is Rudes going to be starting up his own show? And we would lose all our viewers because everybody would want to be watching you instead of us. So that's a risk to our business and our company. So, we're going to have to play it safe there. And we might just have to keep it between us two ugly losers right now. But anyways, I have LSU winning the West. And the reason why is, one, that quarterback situation at Alabama scares me. And I just can't
It
get a
does.
read on it. It seems like Alabama can't get a read on, we walk away from SEC media days and they're saying, oh, well, it looks like Ty Simpson is going to walk out as the starting quarterback for Alabama this year. But you also got Tyler Buckner, a transfer quarterback from Notre Dame, who's coming with Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator from Notre Dame. So maybe you're plugging him right in with Tommy Rees, hoping that he can continue the success that he had, or while it's very small sample size because he was hurt last year. That seems like it's going to be your move. But then you're saying you're going to play murder ball and you're going to run the ball a lot. So at that point, why aren't you naming Jalen Milroe as your starter? Because he would complement that offense the best out of the three. And you still haven't made a decision. It sounds like they're going to play multiple quarterbacks. And week 2, you play Texas. There is not a whole lot of time for you to just kind of play around, play different quarterbacks, see who can make the most out of a drive. Like, there's no time for that. While on the other hand, LSU has Jane Daniels. They have Malik Neighbors coming back. They have Harold Perkins, who might be the best defensive player in the SEC. Mason Smith, while he is suspended for the Florida State game, he returns as well. And then even LSU has more answers at quarterback times 2 than Alabama has all put together. They have Jane Daniels and they have Nussmeier, who's right behind Jane Daniels. And Georgia fans got a taste of how good Nussmeier can be when his number is called. So I think the LSU is just a more complete team. They have more answers. And I just think that they come out on top of the West. But, I mean, if you were to say that Alabama wins the West, obviously I'm not going to be shocked. But that Alabama quarterback room really scares me, and that's what kind of pushes me away from saying that they're going to come back and win the division this year.
Well, that's part of why, like, in my take on it, even though I have them winning there, I have them dropping that game to Texas. Exactly what you said, because Nick Saban and them came out and already said that the quarterback decision isn't going to be made by week 1. So you're going to see a multiple quarterback system in that first game. And I think that they're going to be trying to make that decision based on that first game, even though it is Middle Tennessee that they're playing. I think they're going to try to get all 3 of those quarterbacks some reps in game live situations and see how it goes. And that's part of why I have them losing to Texas, because I don't think that they're really, if they haven't made the decision based on playing against their own team and in practice and everything like that, I don't really see how playing Middle Tennessee is going to give you that answer, which leads me to believe that they're going to carry that on into week 2, and you could see multiple quarterbacks, probably not 3, they'll probably have it down to 2. At that point, you'll see 2 quarterbacks probably play against Texas. And anytime a team is throwing out 2 different quarterbacks in the same game, I'm going to give the advantage to the other team, even though Bama is at home on there. But I think that after that situation, they'll probably figure out who their quarterback is going to be. And at that point, they're going to be able to kind of start hopefully building some more. I say hopefully, but I don't really care, to be honest with you. But they'll probably start to be able to build some momentum. And so to kind of build their offense at that point, because you're kind of handcuffing Tommy Rees on the offensive coordinator side. Like you just said, Buckner is a guy that he's been with for a little bit. And then you got Milroe, who is more of a running quarterback and it plays that style. So there's 2 different styles of offense that he's going to have to be trying to cater to. And so you're kind of handcuffing him until that happens, until that decision is made. Once that decision is made, I think that he might be all right, be able to kind of move along a little bit out there. Like I said, then I have them dropping that Ole Miss game as well, just because that's an early game in the season as well. That, after Texas, they get South Florida, and then they got to play Ole Miss right afterwards. So I think it's, within 4 weeks of the season starting, I think those 2 games are where they're going to slip up, and then they're going to probably catch their groove and keep rolling after that.
Yeah, and LSU does have a pretty tough opening schedule. They got Florida State, which, like I said before, Mason Smith is suspended for that game. And that's a tough game by itself. Obviously, it doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things for conference play, because if you lose that game, it doesn't matter. You could still go out there and you're blemish-free in the SEC West and in the SEC standings. But Florida State in their own right is considered to be a cultural playoff contender this year. But even after that, you play Grambling after Florida State, but then you go to Mississippi State. You have Arkansas at home. You go to Ole Miss. You go to Missouri. And then you have Auburn at home. Like, I understand that may not seem like it, because people may be writing off Auburn, but still, like, for that to be your opening SEC slate, that's no cupcake walk. That's no stroll in the park. That's not something you just go ahead and say dub, 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 dub. Like, we don't even have to think about it twice. Like, that is something you have to think about twice, and you have to give it a second thought maybe. So interested, obviously, to see how LSU stands in the Florida State game. I think that is going to be pretty telling to see 2 high competitors open up the season in week 1. Really juiced to see that one. But we've labeled our top 4 basically, or in a sense, we've labeled our top 4. We got Georgia, Tennessee, and then LSU and Alabama obviously being in the top 4 for us in the SEC. Who's that 5th team, though? I think this is a bigger conversation than what people might think. I don't think it's quite as easy to label a 5th team because I think there's probably 3 or 4 teams that you could come in and say, well, I think they're the 5th best team in the SEC. So who would, if you had to pick one right now, who would you go ahead and lean on to say, like, this is who I'm rocking with?
It's kind of a toss-up on it, but I kind of hinted to it a second ago, I guess. I would, if I have to pick one right now, I'm going to give it to Ole Miss. I have them going 10-2 as well, but with 2 SEC losses in there for them. But the other one that I really think is going to be kind of close just because of the way the rest of the SEC stacks up once you get past 5. Like once you get down to 6 and below, it starts to drop off kind of thing. But these teams right at 5 and 6, I think, are pretty identical to me. And I have the other one being South Carolina going 9-3 and 5-3 in the conference, losing a couple of, pretty big games, to Georgia and Tennessee in there. So they've got a tough schedule. And that, like I just said earlier, Tennessee's got a bone to pick with them at this point. So I don't know that they're going to be able to handle that one on the road, I believe, as well. So, but if I had to pick one of those 2 teams right now to be the 5th, I would say I'm going to give it to Ole Miss. I really want them to kind of figure out the defensive side of the ball a little bit better because I think that's the only thing they're missing to actually be a legit contender. But I just don't know that Lane Kiffin's really putting enough emphasis on that.
Yeah, I am going to hit on this real quick. Dan mentioned Dylan Lonergan as making a lot of noise, according to Chuck Oliver. And Dylan Lonergan probably is the most talented quarterback in that room. He just happens to be the true freshman. And so with that territory, and you got 3 guys ahead of you that have more SEC experience and more experience playing college quarterback, that is probably going to place you a little bit further behind on the depth chart. But I wouldn't blink twice if you get into week 8 of this season and Dylan Lonergan is getting reps for Alabama at quarterback in games. I'm not talking about practice. I ain't talking about practice.
We ain't talking
I'm
about practice.
in a game.
AI over here.
All right, AI. I'm giving you game. I'm saying in a game, Dylan Lonergan. So if you see him rolling out there, I wouldn't be shocked because I think he is the most talented quarterback in that room. And I think if he can get it figured out this year and quickly and start clicking, very well could be Bama's starting quarterback. And he could be the answer that they need at that point in the season to make a push for a college football playoff spot. But for me, I'm with you. I think Ole Miss is the 5th best team. South Carolina, I get there's a lot of hype around them. There was a lot of hype around them last year because they had Spencer Rattler and they brought in a few transfers over to South Carolina. And they ended the season with a lot of momentum. But you're also coming into the year where that momentum can die off very quickly. Like when you go into Georgia, and if you get 40-pieced again, you lose by 30 again or 40 points again, all of a sudden that momentum is back to ground zero. It no longer exists because last year is in the past. It's in the rearview mirror. No one's talking about what South Carolina did to Tennessee at the end of the 2022 season. You're now labeled as, well, damn, you just got the brakes beat off of you by Georgia and Athens. It's the same story as always. We thought that maybe you could compete in the East, but it doesn't look like you are going to this year. So I think Ole Miss is the pick, but it is a little concerning to me that Lane Kiffin came out and made comments that he knows that he is not going to be able to build competitive rosters and that he's not going to be able to build this great culture because kids don't grow up wanting to go to Ole Miss, like he said. Like that's a weird thing for him to say. Now that it may just be him accepting reality, and that might be a good thing because it's good for you to know your weaknesses as a program and where you need to grow. And some things you can fix, some things you can't. So if that's something he feels like he can't fix, then that's okay. You figure out a way to battle back from it and you keep on rolling. But that's just him saying that makes you feel like he knows that he's never going to be a national contender at Ole Miss. And if he's accepting that, that may just mean that he has no desire or drive really maybe to want to like make a number 1 team in the West. You know what I'm saying? So, but I do think they are the 5th best team in the SEC.
Yeah, I think they're good. I want to go back to what you were just saying about South Carolina real quick, too, because of that Georgia game. I think it's a fair point because the momentum part of it, from last season could wear off really quickly because the first part of their schedule is actually really tough. The first 5 games, they get North Carolina in Charlotte. Then they get Furman, which is fine. But then they have Georgia, Mississippi State, and Tennessee. All four of those 5 games aren't easy games. Now, I think that they'll handle North Carolina, and I think that they'll handle Mississippi State without too much of a problem. Now, that North Carolina game could be a really good game for week 1, actually. I think that's one to watch.
50 points might be scored on both sides of that game.
That's a game to watch for sure, but I do think that they come out on top of that. But to your point, a momentum kind of thing is when you have to run through in the first 5 weeks, you got to run through Georgia week 3, and then week 5 you got Tennessee. You're going to be begging for that bye week in week 6 right after that because it's going to be a tough little stretch for them. So I'll give you that for sure.
All right, we'll talk about another team that everybody loves to talk about. Everybody wants to know where do you have them placed. Texas A&M. I know Dan loves Jimbo Fisher. Dan is the biggest Texas A&M Georgia fan that I have ever seen in my life. He is always supporting the Aggies anytime that he can. But where do you have Texas A&M? Because, expectations were riding high from last year. Some people like Desmond Howard had him in the college football playoff. Some people had him winning the West, where, of course, you go and lose to App State and your season is a complete blunder. And boy, oh boy, did you fail that year. But now people are kind of getting back on that Texas A&M wagon again. People are kind of to jump behind Jimbo Fisher again, almost putting a blind eye to what happened last year. And so now, where do you see Texas A&M this year? I know where I see them, but are you getting on that wagon with people? Are you thinking that Texas A&M is going to be making this push based on you saying that Ole Miss is the 5th best team in the SEC? I'm probably saying you aren't, but how do you think this season shakes out for them?
So I think it's a little bit better than last season, but you're right. I'm not saying they're making that push to be in contention for anything. We just went through our top teams there. I have them at 4th in the SEC West. Now, if we're talking overall, they might be in the SEC. I mean, they might be 8th in the SEC when it's all said and done. Because I think I definitely would put South Carolina and probably Kentucky ahead of them as well if I was doing a full side of it. But I have them coming in 4th in the West, coming in at 7-5 and 4-4 in the SEC. They've got some easier games in the SEC, but they've got some really tough ones. Obviously, having to play Ole Miss, Auburn, all of the West teams, LSU, all that kind of stuff. They've got a tough little stretch for them, but I think they're going to be an average team in the SEC. I just don't think they're going to make that jump to being close to a 10-win team or anything like that. But I think that's probably like where they need to be this year before it's time to just get rid of, Fisher. If he can't get to that 7-8, maybe even if he can get up to 9, yeah, I think he's going to be, if they want to start trying to talk about paying that buyout, which I don't know if they will, but if he can't use this roster that now has had an extra year of the best roster ever on his campus, then it's time for them to start really looking.
Yeah, I have Texas A&M pinned in at 4 as well in the West. Talent alone should get you 4th best in the West. That's just saying that you have more talent than Arkansas, you have more talent than Auburn, you have more talent than Mississippi State. So like that alone should get you 4th place in the SEC West. But I'm just not buying into this Texas A&M stuff. I listened to Jimbo Fisher give his whole spiel at the SEC Media Days, and it's a whole lot of cliches. It's a whole lot of nothing. I don't have any takeaways from what Jimbo Fisher said at SEC Media Days. I'm not a believer in Jimbo Fisher as a head coach right now. And they're just a team that, it's one of those things where if they go out there and they finish the year 10-2, okay. Like that's kind of what you were supposed to do. That is who you were supposed to be. That's kind of that's not a surprise to me. But also if they go out there and they finish the year 4-8, okay. I wouldn't be surprised either way. And so Jimbo Fisher, Texas A&M, that team does not really move the needle for me at all. And that's why I just kind of slapped them right there in the middle, because that's how I see them. I think they're the middle of the pack SEC team. I don't see them making a whole lot of noise this year, and I dang sure don't see them competing for a Western Division title.
No, I definitely don't see them in contention for a Western Division title. In fact, I have them. Yeah, I think they're going to lose to Miami in week 2, which before they even get to SEC play, I think they're going to catch their first loss. I mean, other than that, their first few games, I mean, they've got New Mexico week 1, Miami 2, and then UL Monroe. Then they get into Auburn, Arkansas, Alabama, Tennessee. So they have a tough stretch right there after they get through those easy games. But I think that they're going to be already on the losing side, 1-1 after week 2, because Miami, it's not going to be an easy game for them.
You want to hear a crazy stat? Because you brought up UL Monroe. So you want to hear a crazy stat?
Go for it.
UL Monroe has a more recent win in Alabama than any SEC East team.
Really?
Yep. Georgia had it before that. They were the most recent team. Was that 2007, 2008? It was when they went. It was when Matthew Stafford and them went in there and they went to Tuscaloosa and they beat them. 2007. But then UL Monroe upsets them later in the year in Alabama. So UL Monroe has a more recent win in Tuscaloosa than any SEC East team. Now, maybe Tennessee ends that streak. Maybe they claim the title this year. They're probably your best chance. But that's crazy to think about. That is wild to think about.
Who's the let's see. I'm checking something real quick. Kentucky, yeah, because the other SEC East team they play this year is Kentucky, and that's in Lexington. So it's not even. So the only chance this year that you have is Tennessee. So I mean, you really only get one chance a year, and when you're talking about Bama, and when the way that the SEC schedule rotates, I mean that game could be Vanderbilt, that game could be Missouri or something like, or even Florida right now. Like those teams aren't going to really be that competitive. So they kind of get to skate by, they get Tennessee every other year at home. And that's the thing. That's the one that they've dominated that game for so long until last year that it's just been like, you really haven't had a chance for an SEC East team to really get that. Cause when Bama or Georgia went to Bama in what, 2019?
2020.
It was 2020. Okay. So 2020, and obviously that game didn't end well. That was, Stetson's first year taking over after DeJuan Mathis went out as the starter, and it was early in the season. I think that was like week 3 or something, and it was early in the season.
Early.
Yeah, it was early in the season, so Georgia couldn't do it that year. If Georgia got the chance, they might have a better opportunity now than they had in 2020 by far. So,
do they go? No, Alabama comes to Georgia next year, right? I know they have Alabama on the schedule, but Alabama comes to.
No, Athens. I think Georgia might go to. They might go on the road.
I know they go to Austin, but I wasn't sure if they have to go to.
They have to have Bama at home, right? Because like I just said, the last time Bama and Georgia played, it was on the road. They would have to be at home. Hey, Dan or Rudes, can y'all look that up for me real quick? If y'all are still in the comments.
That fact for us.
But that'd be interesting.
I want everybody to know this week. It's weekend at Bernie's, actually. I can't pull my shirt up all the way without showing you my stomach, and we are not that type of channel. We keep it PG around here, not trying to scare anybody away. But, yeah, we got a Weekend at Bernie's T-shirt, one of the greatest movies ever. So I had to pay my respects to that. All right, let's get into some new discussions. I think we kind of got out of the way of all the heavy hitters, the teams that we think are going to be the best in the SEC this year, who's going to be really contending. And then also we had to talk about Jimbo Fisher and Texas A&M because nobody knows what is going on over there at Kyle Field and the Aggies. So now let's talk about Coach of the Year, Offensive Player of the Year, Defensive Player of the Year. We'll start with Offensive Player of the Year, and I might just go ahead and do this. We might say that Brock Bowers doesn't exist in this conversation because that's an easy pick for a Georgia fan. And second, I mean, he's the second best player in college football, best position player arguably in all of college football. So he's a shoo-in almost for Offensive Player of the Year. So anyone outside of Brock Bowers, who would you pick Offensive Player of the Year? Dan confirmed it is at Alabama next year. So
2 games in a row at Bama. That's pretty messed up, isn't it? They couldn't throw us a bone on that one?
Apparently not.
All right. So when we're talking about SEC Player of the Year, or we're talking SEC, right? Not just like offensive player, like
SEC
in the country.
Player of
SEC specific. What's the guy? I can't remember his first name, but the Judkins dude from Ole Miss. I think he's
Judkins.
Yeah. He's gonna. I mean, he could daggum come near 2,000 yards rushing this year if I'm not allowed to pick Brock Bowers. I mean, I'm thinking he's at least 1,500 yards rushing this year, like at least.
He did it last year.
Yeah, he's at least. That's why I say at least, and he could be getting up towards that 1,800 yard mark. As they start learning how to use him a little bit more, even than last year, which sounds crazy to say, but based on what he did, and then he's gonna. If he does something like that, he's obviously going to be in the Heisman conversation. I think we talked about this a few weeks ago. There's been a few running backs in the SEC or in the country that have been able to get to that 2,000 yard mark over the past several years, but haven't seen it too often. Obviously, it's kind of a rare thing, but he's one that could get pretty daggum close. And so I think he'd be my bet for Offensive Player of the Year if I can't choose Brock Bowers.
Yeah, my bold prediction one of my bold predictions for this year was that Quinshon Judkins finishes top 7 in the Heisman finalist voting. So that's a really solid pick. I think there's a lot of options you could go with. Jaden Daniels, he's going to put up Offensive Player of the Year type numbers because he can run, he can pass. Same with KJ Jefferson. I think KJ Jefferson is in a position to win this award because that entire offense is KJ Jefferson and Raheem Sanders. And so he's going to put up stupid numbers because he has to for Arkansas to stay competitive in football games. And that's about all they got outside of Sanders on that offense. But I think Jaden Daniels is going to I would pick him to win Offensive Player of the Year just because, like I said, he's going to have the weapons to do it.
He's going to have a good year.
He's going to have a good year. He's going to get the rushing yards. He's going to get the passing yards, and he's going to be a flashy player to do it. He's going to get the media attention to win SEC Offensive Player of the Year. So that would be my pick to do it.
Yeah, I think that's a good pick right there. I think, like we just said earlier, I think LSU is going to do extremely well this year. They're going to be at the top of the SEC, and while I had them not necessarily finishing first, it's very possible that they will. It's really hard to make those preseason predictions, but if they're as good as we think that they might be this year, then I think it is a very high possibility that he's going to have that type of performance, and honestly, put himself in the Heisman candidate kind of conversation. But when the end of the year comes around, I think that's a great pick.
All right, we'll go defensive side of the football. We won't mark off any Georgia players for this one because, I mean, heck, there's so many different ones on Georgia's defense that you could pick alone. And I just also think, heck, there's tons of great defensive players in the conference. So if you had to pick one, and it can be Georgia, like I said. So if you want to give Georgia a shout out to this one, then you can go right ahead. Who would you say wins Defensive Player of the Year?
I'm gonna go hot take on this one. You ready for it?
Hot take. How hot are we talking? Let's hear it. How
Well,
hot are we talking?
hot in the sense of that I think he's going to be a breakout player for Georgia this year, but he's also going to be one of those things that with that he's gonna potentially be at the better defensive player. Dumas-Johnson. I think he is going to go off this year. He's going to be that linebacker for Georgia that makes all of that, all that noise that we're used to seeing from a linebacker. And I think a linebacker is, linebacker or like an edge rusher are usually going to be your defensive player of the year type things defensively. Otherwise, I would say that you got Malachi Starks at the back end. That's, a first team All-American, as a freshman and just lighten it up and all that kind of stuff. But I'm going to go with JDJ.
That's a good pick. I think he could have a Buckus Award type winning season.
Exactly.
He could win the third one for Georgia in 6 years.
Since Roquan.
Third one after Roquan Smith and Nakobe Dean. So I think that's a really good pick. Obviously, he's going to put up the numbers to do so and be in the running for that. I'm going to go I'll go a different team. Dan's saying Caleb Downs. Caleb Downs has Freshman Player of the Year written all over him.
Yeah,
but I don't think he has SEC Defensive Player of the Year written all over him. But I am going to go to Alabama. I'm going to say Dallas Turner. I think Dallas Turner and Kool-Aid McKinstry are the two best defensive players right now on on Alabama's roster. Those are going to be the two key guys for them if they're going to have any type of defensive success. And Dallas Turner is going to be playing that Will Anderson type role. He's going to be making plays on the football. They're going to have him getting after the quarterback. And when you have that combination, when you have him being that much of an emphasis on Alabama's defensive line, and you know how Alabama likes to use those type of edge rushers, he's going to put up stupid numbers, and he's going to have to if Alabama is going to win the SEC East or West like you said they would. So I'm saying Dallas Turner because he's going to put out the production, he's going to have the flash, and he's going to do it all for Alabama. So I think he's going to win Defensive Player of the Year.
Yeah, I think that's a great pick. Obviously, Alabama as a whole doesn't seem to have a very good defense anymore, but they still always have that one or two, maybe three players on their defensive side of the ball that are, high draft picks, are going to make a lot of noise in that aspect of it. So yeah, I think that's a great pick. And like I said earlier, if they are going to be towards the top of the SEC, they are going to have to be able to play some more defense that they haven't really done much of in the past couple of seasons. So I think they're going to need some help from that side of the ball. And if they have that type of production, then maybe they have a little bit better of a defense than we're used to seeing from them lately.
Absolutely. Maybe they can get something going after Kirby Smart left. Maybe they can get that defense back to where everybody was used to seeing them. Because Lord knows that they need it. All right, Coach of the Year. There's quite a few options you could go with because, heck, between Tennessee, LSU, Alabama, Georgia. Any of those guys could be candidates to win Coach of the Year this year, or even a team like South Carolina or Missouri, Kentucky, Ole Miss. If Jimbo Fisher can get something going for the Aggies, any of those guys, if they put together a really solid season, they could be Coach of the Year this year. But if you had to pick one, who are you going to go with?
If I had to pick one, I'm going to avoid Kirby Smart on this just because I feel like, he's going to have such high expectations of him to go in undefeated regular season. And I believe they make the Coach of the Year thing before the national championship and everything anyways, sometime in December after the SEC championship game, like after conference championships. So I think that they're probably going to avoid doing it to him just because I think the expectations are so high. If it plays out the way you and I've been talking about today, I think Brian Kelly's got a really good argument. His second year in the SEC, if he does finish 11-1 with an SEC championship game appearance or something like that, I think he's got a really, really good argument for it.
I am going to go Kirby Smart here. And the reason why is because if this man goes out there and wins 17 straight football games combined, or
Yeah.
not 17 straight, 27 straight football games, if you go from going 15-0 to then 12-0 again, maybe even 13-0, because I think it may be after it's before the SEC championship game, I think. Anyways, doesn't matter. If you do that, if you have 2 perfect seasons in the regular season, that's freaking almost dang near impossible for anyone to accomplish in this day and age of college football. Plus, you combine that with the fact that he's going to have his team in a prime position to win 3 straight national titles. That is coach of the year worthy right there. You lose your starting quarterback and you're right back in the mix. You're right back in the dance. You're right back in Atlanta defending your SEC title. That's coach of the year written all over. And if it isn't, I don't know what is. Obviously, Brian Kelly, if he goes and wins the West again, that's coach of the year. If Nick Saban wins the West, that's coach of the year candidate. If Josh Heupel goes 11-1 with only 1 loss to Georgia, that's coach of the year. I mean, so it can go either way. But I just think if Kirby Smart goes and gets Georgia to another undefeated regular season, he should be coach of the year. Because, I mean,
I agree. He should be.
Accomplishing that, my gosh.
Yeah. I think he should be. I think that the reason I think they might go another route, not because I don't think he deserves it, is just because I think that they're, like you just named off all those other people that are going to have an argument for it, right? And then you're looking at like, well, Kirby Smart's already established this. Maybe Nick Saban's kind of established what he's done, so he's not going to – but we're looking at like an LSU building up from the dirt essentially within 2 years, winning the conference last year and potentially winning it again this year. And if he does, or winning the West, I should say, not the conference, the division, then I think that's why I think they might go a different route. And like you said, with Heupel and all those other teams out there as well, or coaches out there, I think that they're going to find a reason to give it to somebody else. But I'm with you. I do think that Kirby Smart in that situation, like I think it should be hands down. I just don't know that I trust their voting to give it to him, if that makes sense.
I gotcha. I'm following. And, in those types of things, when you are voting for coach of the year, there is kind of a tendency sometimes to maybe stay away from the clear, obvious choice. Like if like last year, Kirby Smart going 12-0, that might get overshadowed by Tennessee having a great year under Josh Heupel, or LSU making it to the SEC title game in year 1 with Brian Kelly. So those types of factors always come into play. So sometimes it isn't just the guy that was the most dominant coach and his team went out there and played the best every single week. So definitely just a toss-up. There's no easy way to just like, oh, it's the obvious choice that it's going to be Kirby Smart, because, so many different things can happen throughout the year. But I do think, like I said, if they go 12-0, Kirby Smart would be the guy to take home the award, or at least he should be. Now, I do think we'll talk about this real quick before we close out this episode. College Game Day made its return on Saturday, and they gave their predictions for the College Football Playoff, and they gave their predictions for the SEC title game and who's going to win the SEC.
Yep.
Pat McAfee, Kirk Herbstreit, Desmond Howard all picked Alabama to win the SEC this year. Desmond Howard did not have Georgia making it to the College Football Playoff. Pat McAfee and Kirk Herbstreit both did have Georgia making it to the College Football Playoff. I believe it was Pat McAfee that had Georgia losing to Alabama in the national title game, and then Kirk Herbstreit had Georgia losing in the semifinal round. I can't remember who they had them losing to, but thoughts on that? What do you think? But more importantly, what do you think about all three saying that Alabama is going to win the SEC West?
They didn't even just say the West. They said the title in general. I think that's the biggest stretch, right? Like the playoff part, I'll get into that in a second. But I think the biggest stretch is to come out here and say that you think Alabama is going, like clean sweep, all three of them said that Alabama's going to not only get to the SEC championship game, but win it. And I think that they could get there, but I don't think that, especially with their current situation, not playing very much defense and their quarterback situation still being so much up for discussion, I don't think that they would be able to beat Georgia if they got there. So while I'm not surprised they could get there, I don't think that they would be able to win that game. I think that's pretty shocking. As far as I think it's ridiculous to say that Georgia won't make the playoffs this year. I think that's something that with the regular season they have, if they go undefeated 12-0, like most people think that they will, even if they were to lose, say, to Alabama in the SEC championship game, they would still make the playoffs unless you had three other undefeated teams out there or something like that. And so they couldn't fit you in, but we don't ever get that. So I think that they would still get into the playoffs either way. I don't really find it disrespectful to say that they would potentially lose the national championship game because we're talking about a three-peat at this point, and I have a gut feeling that it's not going to be a TCU lining up on the other side of that ball next year. I think it's going to be a Ohio State, a Michigan, or a Bama, or somebody that's actually a competitor that's going to challenge you more. So I don't think it's going to be a 65-7 type national championship game. So saying that they may not win it for the third time in a row, it doesn't bother me as a Georgia fan. I think that's reasonable to say it's possible that happens. Now I'll say this: I can't remember who you said it, but whoever said that they would lose in the semifinals, Georgia doesn't do that. They don't lose in the semifinals, so we're not going to say they're going to lose in the semifinals.
No, they do not. Kirby Smart and Georgia are undefeated in semifinal games, so you are right to say that they do not lose in the semifinal. I'll tell you what I think is disrespectful about this, and I made a tweet about this, and it got some attention, like rightfully so, because it is in a sense some bullcrap. That analysts will sit there, look you in the eye through your TV screen, and they'll say, Georgia is not going to win the national championship this year because they lost Stetson Bennett and because they have a quarterback change this year, and that is what is going to hinder them, and that is what makes me scared. That is what is keeping me from saying Georgia is going to win the national championship game. They will then, right after that, almost in the dang same near sentence, tell you that Alabama is going to win the national title game. Like I said, one of them predicted Alabama to be in the national championship game.
Yeah.
Have we not been paying any attention to Alabama's quarterback situation? So, like, if that is is the hill that you're dying on for Georgia, why aren't we saying the same thing for Alabama? And better yet, all last year, a lot of the media was feeding is that, Georgia has Stetson Bennett at quarterback. I don't know if he's the type of quarterback that can go through a 15-game schedule and win Georgia a national championship. And now you're saying he's the reason that they won't win the national title this year because he is gone and Georgia no longer has him. So you got to pick one. And you also can't have one standard for someone else, someone that already has a starting quarterback name, and then look at the other who is deciding between three different options and is saying that they won't have a starting quarterback tab until maybe week 2 against Texas and say, like, yeah, they're the clear-cut winner for the national title game this year. That's what's bullcrap about this.
I was actually, until you got to the end of that rant there, I was about to say the same thing. As like the irony of it is last year that now they're saying that Stetson Bennett leaving is the problem, but last year nobody in the media and stuff believed in Stetson Bennett to be who he was until the season was coming towards an end. All year long was like, well, can Stetson do it? We don't really know. And like, I think that Tennessee's going to come in there and beat them. All that kind of stuff that we kept getting week after week because of Stetson Bennett. Even fans and everybody didn't think Stetson Bennett was like that. But now, all of a sudden, that Stetson Bennett's gone. It's really funny because outside of the talking heads, too, when you start looking at the Florida Gator fans and stuff like that, where now they're the ones that are sitting here saying, well, you lost Stetson Bennett. So now they're the ones that were always telling us that he was a car salesman or an insurance agent and stuff like that. But now because we lost him, we're not going to be able to go up to Knoxville and win that game anymore. It's just the irony of it is hilarious to me because, like, I don't think people hear or remember what they said, over the past several months of what we had. It's kind of funny to me, honestly. I just sit back and kind of giggle at it because what else are you going to do? I mean, they're going to go out there. They're not going to have a problem with starting quarterback. I think Carson Beck is a very capable quarterback. And if Georgia does not go back to, the national championship in three-peat, I don't think it's going to be because of quarterback. There's going to be other factors in there that play into it.
Yeah, and I will say it is worth noting that last year, nobody on College Game Day's crew had Georgia winning the national title game. David Pollack didn't have him winning it. Kirk Herbstreit didn't have him winning it. Lee Corso didn't have him winning it. And Desmond Howard didn't even have Georgia in the mix. But last year's college football playoff predictions
we ain't going to talk about Desmond Howard's playoff predictions.
He shouldn't have even been given the privilege to make another prediction this year after putting
they got rid of David
Pollack
this year, but they let him stay with after his prediction that he made. Are we serious?
Yeah, not a good look for the game day crew. So, but as I'm saying, don't mean a hill of beans. Those predictions don't mean squat. Georgia's been doubted once and twice, and they could do it 3 times in a row. So, a lot of high expectations. That is, unless you got something else, Star, you want to add anything else to the conversation? No, you were shaking your head no. So we're going to keep going with the outro. Like and subscribe. We're pretty bad about this. We don't tell you to like and subscribe until the end of the video. We should probably let y'all know kind of in between the episodes. Just a coaching point for ourselves at the end of this episode. Some self-coaching. That's important. You got to look at yourself in the mirror and analyze your issues. That's an issue for us. We'll fix that. But if you are still hanging around, like and subscribe for us. share with all your friends, tell them about the good people over at Classic City Podcast, because that's going to be the place to be this college football season as it kicks off officially for the Dogs on Saturday. So stay tuned in for us. We'll be here every Sunday at 8 p.m. recapping the games right after, not even 24 hours after sometimes, telling you about what we think about the Dogs and how they played on Saturday. So this is the place to be. Hope you show up every single week like you guys have been doing in the comment section during our live streams. Do all that. Follow us on Twitter to keep up posted on alerts. And Stoddard, you can close us out.
Yeah, as always, guys, keep it classy in the Classic City. We will catch you next week.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Classic City Sports. Take a second to subscribe, rate, review, and share with your friends and family. Feel free to reach out to the Classic City Sports crew on Twitter with any topics you'd like discussed. You can reach out to Jeremiah at The Stodfather, to Jonathan at Dr._J Will, and make sure to follow at Classic City Pod for show updates. Check back next week for a brand new episode. In the meantime,
2 simple words which express the sentiments of the entire Bulldog Nation.